Welcome, welcome. Hi, I'm Peggy Sagers, and I wanted to show you a method of welt pockets mainly because I see so many welt pocket methods out there, and what I have found is there's just this one, and it's so simple, and it doesn't matter to me what you do as a welt pocket, but I do want to make sure that at least you have a real simple method of doing one. This is what the welt looks like when it's done. We call this a double welt. It's beautiful. It's really simple. I learned this method from a woman who literally made her living off making welt pockets. She would go to the factory, she would pick up everything that had to be had a welt pocket put into. She would drop her kids off to school, she went home, she made all the welt pockets, she'd take them back, she'd pick her kids up from school, and there she was. So it was exhausting, and yet she had this method down to where it took 90 seconds. You don't need to take that much time. You could get it faster. I do it much slower, but let me show you. There's just 3 easy steps. The reason I like this method is because it's predetermined that you can't fail, and that's what I like about it. This is going to be our jacket. You can actually, I'm going to go back to my jacket for just a minute, because you can put this on anything. The only thing you're going to need is a welt strips and a pocket piece, and I'll cover that. But what you're going to do is, to mark where the pocket goes, is you're going to put a pin right at the end and right in between where you want those, we're going to call them lips or welts. So that's actually what's going to mark the length of my pocket, and if you notice, it's where I'm going to put the strips. So that translates on this to being right there and right there. So notice that's the end of my pocket, and it's where the raw edges are going to go against. So I'm going to start off with my jacket. The only other pieces I need on that, I'm going to need my welt strips, and those welt strips are 8 inches long, 1 inch wide. Now all that can vary, you know, according to fashion, according to style, but I'm just going to say for today's argument they're going to be 8 inches long and 1 inch wide. I have folded those strips in half. I've pressed them. That's the only time during this method you're going to press, is before you sew these strips on. And then again, they're 8 inches long, 1 inch wide. They are on a bias, and the reason being is so that when I put my hand into a pocket, it gives and it gives back, so that those welts become very flexible. Also then I have a pocket piece, and the pocket piece is actually going to sew one to the top and one to the bottom here in a minute, but that pocket is going to be flexible. I want it to be the length of my welts, but as far as depth goes, it's my choice. Notice on this welt where it's at the bottom of a jacket, that welt pocket is very shallow. It's really just for looks, but I wanted it to be real, so I don't want it going down into my hem. So just make sure you cut it the width of the welt and then cut it the depth you want. Okay, so we've got our pieces. Step 1, I'm going to sew 2 parallel lines. I'm going to sew the welts to the right side of the fashion fabric wherever I want that pocket to go. Again, they're 1 inch wide, 8 inches long. Notice I'm starting and back stitching, stitch, 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 and I'm right down the center of the strips. So remember, there's 3 steps. This is step number 1, and each step is done twice. So 1 stitch, 1 stitch. If you turn it to the back, I'm using 1 color fabric, 1 color welt, 1 color pocket, 2 different color threads. The reason I'm doing that is simply for you all and demonstration. If you're doing a real welt, you want all of this to be the same color. Even the pocket piece, everything is fashion fabric. I would fuse the welts, I would probably fuse the fashion fabric. I don't have to, depends on my fabric, but just know that it's going to be all the same color. If I turn it on the back side, what I will see is 2 parallel lines. Those parallel lines, if you notice, will be 1/2 inch apart. And you know, be accurate in this, and this is what I like about this method, because if I mess this up, I haven't cut my jacket, I haven't cut anything. I could take those lines out and do it again. In fact, I could do it as many times as I need to get it correct. I want to stop and start at the same place and stop and start at the same place. Alright, so that's step 1. We're going to put that away. Then what I do after step 1 is I'm going to cut in between the welts. Many of your other methods, and this is what I really like about this one method, is how long I cut these ends. These ends are very long. They're at least 1 inch long. A lot of your methods have you cut this little tiny triangle at the end. It's very easy for that triangle to agitate back and forth. So when you're cutting down the welts, just cut right down the middle. I always cut from the wrong side, but it doesn't make a difference. And then do a little triangular piece, a little V shape right to the point. It has to be to but not through, and that's why you're back stitching these points. Alright, so now I'm ready for step number 2, and step number 2 is attaching the pocket. So it doesn't matter which order I do this in, I'm just going to take the ends of these welts and I'm going to tuck them to the wrong side. And if you'll notice, what will happen is those welts, because see how they're cut right to that point, they'll literally just pivot right around. Don't do both welts at one time. It's a little confusing when you're learning. When you know what you're doing and you want to do that, that's no problem. But you see that's welts completely turned to the inside and only one welt's turned to the inside. The second step is where I'm going to add my pocket. I've got two sides. I've got a hole on this side. I'm going to take the pocket and I'm going to cover the hole. And I'm going to line the raw edges up together. There's no hole on that side. You can see the thread. So you're not going to put the pocket on that side. You're going to cover the hole. The edges line up together. I can't stitch on that side, so I'm going to flip it to where I can stitch, and I'm going to stitch on the side that I can see. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start stitching where I have just the welt and the pocket, not my fashion fabric. I'm not going to come onto my fashion fabric until I'm literally right at that back stitch point, and I'm going to stitch right along where I've already stitched before. But don't stitch onto the fashion fabric except the back stitched point, and I'll show you what's happening here. When I pull this up, you see that beautifully stitched welt, and now it's just secured because it's got the pocket piece behind it. So it's so very easy to do. Just I've got to be real careful here at my corners so that I don't, you know, if I overstitch that corner, I mean if I stitch prior to that fashion fabric, I'll get a little bump in the corner, so I don't want to do that. Then you're going to do it again. So I'm going to take this welt, I'm going to tuck it to the inside, and again, it doesn't matter at this point which one's up, which one's down, which one you do first. Remember that that's because that's clipped to that point. That's going to pivot just right around really easily. I have a hole on this side, I don't have a hole on this side, so I'm going to take this long pocket piece, I'm going to cover the hole, I'm going to line those raw edges up together, I'm going to stitch where I can see the stitching from previously where I stitched the welt onto the fashion fabric. I'm going to do what we call overstitch. No reason to backstitch here. I'm going to overstitch, so I'm going to stitch exactly where it's been stitched before. I'm using different color thread, so I've actually got a pink on the bottom and a green on the top. So I would actually be looking at my pink thread here, and I would be overstitching with my green thread. And again, just stitch off the end. So now when I look inside, what I see is these two beautiful welts. Alright? I've got the welts done, they're looking beautiful, I'm getting all excited. Now I've got to stitch the ends, and all I'm going to do, this is step 3, I'm going to pull this forward, pull this pocket down, don't press, because the pressing a lot of times will agitate those corners. I'm just going to lay everything nice and straight. The nice thing is this triangle is so big, it's hard to move, so it'll already be in place for you. Pull that forward and make sure those welts are just touching one another. I don't want there to be any kind of gap. Just kind of reach in there, and I'm literally just going to overstitch. I'm going to start at the top, and I'll show you this after I stitch. Stitch across that big fat triangle. Don't stitch the fashion fabric except where it's already been stitched, and at the same time I'm going to close up the end of that welt pocket. So you can see I started stitching up here, stitched right through there, kept those welts together, and that corner will lay absolutely beautiful. Alright, now I'm just going to do the same thing to this end, and that's why I say what's important is that the welts be 1 inch wide, that they be even, that I've stitched down the middle, because once I've stitched down the middle and they fold together, they'll create this beautiful welt. There's just no way for it to mess up. There's no folding, there's no layering, there's no any of that. So I'm going to pull this forward again. Whenever I do this side and I've got this far to stitch, I always just go ahead and I stitch this part first just to make sure it's right. Notice here again I'm going to peek under those welts. I've got to make sure those welts are touching. I want to pull down the pocket. I want to make sure it's not kind of stuck underneath there, but I'm going to put that down. And I go ahead and just stitch under this, I stitch through the fattest part of that welt. Be a little little aggressive when you do that, just to make sure it's right at the base, so that when you close that down you can see how nice and smooth that leaves. Once I see that I have that right, then I go ahead and finish up the pocket to close up the actual pocket, so that if I use it I won't lose anything that's in my pocket. And then I overstitch that same side again. So you can see how beautiful that is. I didn't press it anything you shouldn't. And what you'll do is, when you start learning how to do this method, you'll start sewing welt pockets everywhere. They're just amazing how fun and easy they are, and you'll put them all over. So go make a welt pocket, enjoy it. Just remember not to use all these funky colors. Okay, thanks for watching. Be with us, sign up for our YouTube station, and join us. We've got all kinds of great things for you. Thanks so much for being here. Bye. How long?